Um, I'm on a work trip right now, so I'm sitting in a hotel room and have nothing better to do than to do an interview with you. So
Dude, that's perfect. That's perfect. And you really kind of messed that up because you could have really went, look, I'm traveling for work, but as you know, I work from the for the government, and I'm coming to you live from an undisclosed location, deep,
top secret.
deep underground, someplace where no one will ever find me. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, but
yeah.
we'll
I
make
did
do
kind of
with
ruin that.
that. I mean, we'll make do with that, I guess. So
They
everything
did put
going?
me in a nice.
What's
They
that?
did put me in a nice hotel.
They
Uh,
did?
yeah, yeah. I'm in Embassy Suites in Huntsville, Alabama. So
Yeah,
it's not too bad.
those aren't bad. Did I ever tell you about my trip when we were living back east to like New York?
Do tell.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So, if anybody has kids, you might just want to like put earmuffs on them for this one. I don't want to offend anybody. But my mother-in-law was coming in and it was, she's like, I want to go to New York and I want to see the sights. And I'm like, fair enough. This sounds like it'll be fun. We'll
See.
make the jaunt from Maryland up the eastern seaboard to New York, and we should be good. Now this is in the infancy of like um oh like your Travelocity and that sort of thing, right? You're talking like 2004, 2005, right? So certainly those sites are out there, but most of the time you're just going straight to the hotel's website. And there's not ratings really, right? Like it's not like it is now where you can really do a good thorough check.
Right.
Well, I know I do not want to stay in New York on a Friday night, right? I have that figured out, right?
Okay.
So I'm looking, and just across the border in a town called Hoboken, New Jersey, there was a hotel. And
Okay.
it was a name brand hotel and usually very nice hotels, right? And I'm
Yeah.
like looking at the pictures and looking at the pictures of the room. I'm like, oh, that doesn't look bad. So I booked that bad boy.
Yeah. But
Now,
it's New Jersey.
but it is New Jersey. Yeah. When they say the Garden State, they're lying. Don't. That's not true. Anyway, so I'm like, okay, this will be all right because we're just gonna stay for 6, 8 hours, get some sleep, and then we're into New York, right? So I'm sitting there, we're driving, and we get close to the destination, and I pull in, and the exterior doesn't look anything like the exterior in the pictures. But I'm like,
Okay. Of
okay, all right, it is
course
what
not.
it is. It is what it is, right? So I go in, and my mother-in-law, she's like, well, I need to stretch my legs, so I'll go in with you. I'm like, that's fine. So she follows me in. Now, my mother-in-law, nice lady, but not necessarily seasoned in the ways of the world. And we walk in, and the man at the front desk, and this should have been my dead giveaway. We walk into the front desk, and the guy at the counter, he's like, oh, yeah. And I was like, hi, I'm Dave. And he's like, oh, I don't see your reservation here. And I'm like, well, I made it.
Mm.
And then he's like, oh, I see. I didn't refresh the system. And so, yeah, but it's okay. We can still get you in. Not a problem. And then we go into the room, and I swear there's a blood stain on the carpet. Right? Like
Oh
the
my
only
goodness.
thing missing from this scene is like the chalk outline of the body.
Yeah.
I'm
Some
like,
use needles or something on the carpet.
right, right. I'm like, nope, we're out.
Yeah.
Right? We're out. And so I go down there. I'm like, hey man, we're checking out. And I'm like, I
Oh,
want
it
no
was the
fee.
hourly rate.
Right. I'm like, you can charge me the couple hours. I'm gone. Right. So
Uh-huh.
I'm like, okay. And again, this is before Google Maps. This is before smartphones, right? So I'm thinking there's got to be something between here and New York, right? Nope.
Uh-huh.
Next thing I know, I'm
Yeah.
driving this massive Ford Excursion, right? Like this is the definition of an MPV, a Mormon personnel vehicle, with
Yeah.
with four kids in the back, my
Okay.
wife and my mother-in-law. And we're driving down there, and I'm all of a sudden in Times Square. And like the most busiest place I have ever been. I'm not equipped
Yeah.
for this. right? But yeah,
Yeah.
I've got to maintain total calm, right? I got to be like, we're good. We'll get through
Yeah.
this. No sweat. So eventually, I kind of find this hotel in downtown. Now, I knew it was going to be expensive, right? Like,
Yeah.
I knew
Pricey.
it's going to be pricey. It's Friday. I get it. But here was the other big takeaway. If your hotel sounds like it could be an upscale food item from a really fancy restaurant, don't stay there. It's going to be
Okay.
expensive. Because the name of this place was the Wellington, right? And I think of beef
Yeah.
Wellington, right?
Right. Right.
So I swing in, we get into the parking garage, I go to the lobby, and I'm like, okay, um, you got a room. I don't care. One room will do. Doesn't matter. And she's like looking in her computer and she's like, I got one room. Um, it's one of kind of our medium sized rooms. I'm like, I'll take it. And she's like, that'll be $500.
Yeah.
I'm like, ugh, that hurts. Right. But I'm like, whatever. We're just going to get the room. We go up to the room and I kid you not, it is maybe the size of like half the size of like where you're staying at right now. And I got to cram 7 people into this bad boy.
Uh-huh.
And so like I was never so glad the next night to see like a Holiday Inn, right? I'm like, oh, this
Yeah.
is going to be fantastic. But yeah, that would the moral of the story is there's nothing between Hoboken and New York. Just stay out of there. There's nothing there.
Okay.
Just stay out. But anyway, yeah. So
That's funny.
I've had my share of bad rooms. So whenever you travel, it's always nice to know you got a nice clean room to stay in for sure.
The only bad hotel room I've ever been in was just outside Kirtland, Ohio. We went there for the eclipse,
Okay.
and it was the only place really available. And made reservations. And when we got there, they said we're tripling the price
When you
because
got there,
well, we knew actually I take that back. We knew probably a week before because I called out just to make sure that we're still good. I'd made these reservations like 6 months in advance.
okay.
Um, but then by the time it was getting close to the eclipse, everything is filled up, and they said, yeah, we're not honoring that. We're tripling the price, so you can have it still. But anyway, I was a little upset, but it still was anyway. But I mean, what am I going to do? So, but that place was horrible. Um, it was the filthiest. It was
Ooh.
the filthiest place I've ever stayed in. I mean, it was bad, but anyway. But the eclipse was cool, and
Right,
Kirtland was
right,
amazing,
right,
so
right. And
it was
and
worth
that
it.
it's funny how us guys can get past that real quick, right? Like we're like, well, we'll see the Statue of Liberty tomorrow in Ellis Island. It'll be fine,
Yeah,
right? Um, boy, my wife and my mother-in-law though, that did not fly as well as it did for me, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but anyway, all right, dude, what are we talking about today?
Okay, yeah. This is I gave a version of um, this talk, I guess, this kind of presentation at the last Restoration Tour conference. I thought it would be interesting to give it again, not necessarily in the same way, um, but it's the idea of the law of Moses before Moses. So, I wish I had it right in front of me. I don't, but there's a pretty well known quotation from Joseph Smith. He's talking about animal sacrifice and other things, but mostly about the law of sacrifice. And he says that the law of sacrifice, animal sacrifice, is going to be restored and is part of the restoration of all things spoken by the mouths of all the holy prophets. And um, he talks about both the sacrifices performed by the patriarchs, Adam and Noah and Abraham, and also the Levitical sacrifices under the law of Moses. And he says all these things are going to be restored. But there is kind of a little hang up, or a little a thing that people get hung up on, I guess, where he says in saying this, and this is just paraphrase, of course. he says, in saying this, I'm not saying that all of the variety. I think he says the variety of ceremonies and things connected with the law of Moses are going to be restored, but those things that were prior to Moses, all of those things will be restored.
Mm.
Okay, so now a lot of people when they read that part, it's kind of relieving. I don't know, because we really don't. We've definitely absorbed the generally Christian ideas about the law and about kind of the way that God changes His plan, from dispensation to dispensation, which Joseph Smith had some things to say about, and the New Testament and the Book of Mormon, they also can be interpreted in a way that seems to imply that as well. And I don't want to get too much into that for this, but I just want to talk about what are the things then that were given before Moses? What parts of the law at least can we be sure of there? And we can then infer from Joseph Smith's statement and also from the words of the prophets themselves in the Bible and other places that those things will be a part of the restoration. So the restoration is ongoing, of course, but so anyway, now I do want to say, I'll just say kind of my view of what Joseph is saying there goes like this. The law of Moses, like if you ask, well, if you ask most Jews today, then there's many different sects of Judaism, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
Not as many as there are of Christianity, but there are quite a few, half a dozen or so different sects of Judaism, probably more than that. Most of them are rabbinical in nature, so which means they are the modern descendants of the Pharisees in Jesus's time.
Right.
And if you ask a rabbinical Jew what the law of Moses is, they will tell you that it consists of two parts. One is the written Torah, which is basically contained in the 5 books of Moses. And the other is what they call the oral Torah. And this is basically the traditions of the elders that have been passed along and eventually codified in a book called, or a series of books called the Talmud.
Okay.
And they will tell you that that these together are the law of Moses, and also that the traditions of the rabbis, the traditions of the elders, they actually take precedence over the scriptures, over the written Torah.
Okay.
And a lot of the kind of distinctive things about Judaism are found in the Talmud and not in the 5 books of Moses. So, rules about how many steps you can take, on the Sabbath, and rules about eating meat and milk together, and how many minutes or hours you have to wait in between eating meat and milk, and just kind of the minutia of the proper way to slaughter animals, and all the requirements for the knife and the person, and on and on, and I don't want to get into the weeds on that, but a lot of the things that makes Judaism unique and distinctive come from the Talmud and not necessarily from the 5 books of Moses.
So let me
go
ask
ahead.
a couple questions here real quick. I had somebody tell me the answer to this before. I want to see if it's the same here. Why did the Pharisees kind of win out, so to speak, in history versus the Sadducees?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. It really is because the Sadducees were basically these are kind of like it's kind of akin to political parties, but these are like religious parties, or
Right.
or sects. Um, Although everyone, and actually, I kind of like this that there's these different sects of Judaism, but everyone got to use the temple,
Right.
um, regardless, because we're all Israelites, even if we disagree about the interpretation of things. We all agree that the temple is important, and we've got this temple here, so everyone gets to use it. So I like that. But the Sadducees were basically the priests and like the priestly class, and they had some different ideas from the teachers or the rabbis,
Mm-hmm.
and so back in Jesus' day, they were kind of maybe more evenly matched in their authority, their influence. But once the temple was gone, then the Sadducees kind of lost their edge, so to
Yeah.
speak, and there's nothing more for them to do. So Pharisaical or rabbinical Judaism fills in that gap, and that's where we find ourselves.
Okay. And then one other question here, and that's exactly what I'd heard. The synopsis I was given was, well, the Sadducees were really over the temple. That was their point of focus.
Yeah,
And the scriptures travel real well, the temple not so much, right?
right.
And so once it's destroyed, like the need for Sadducees kind of went away. Now,
Yeah.
let me ask you the Torah versus the Talmud. Um, as you look at it, um, do you put weight? Do you weight one higher than the other, so to speak? You put more weight on one versus the other, and then
Oh, absolutely.
what about the bulk of Judaism? Do they have are they weighted different?
Well, as far as like, I mean, Judaism is the Talmud and the
Okay,
Torah. So and the rest of the scriptures too are definitely a part of their faith. But like I said, they Judaism does prioritize the interpretations of the rabbis, and I would say that I love actually reading Jewish interpretations of things, and I love reading Christian and Mormon interpretations of things too. Um, but most of all, I love the scriptures, the written word, and for me, that takes precedence, like the actual revealed word of God, and everything else is. I mean, if you ask a rabbi, I mean, they won't say it in these words, but you ask them what is the law of Moses, they will say it's the philosophies of men mingled with scripture. You know, um,
okay,
so so rabbis, the interpretations of the rabbis are good. Like traditions are good and beautiful and even necessary sometimes. But when there's a contradiction between tradition and the revealed word of God, then for me, the written word is what needs to stay, and the tradition needs to be pruned away.
okay,
So when Joseph says, okay, so if you ask the rabbis, if you ask Jews what the law of Moses is, they will tell you it is this thing that is this mixture of the scriptures and what the rabbis say. And the thing is that if you ask Christians or Mormons what is the law of Moses, they'll actually tell you the same thing. They'll say it is what the rabbis say it is. It's all this. It's the minutia of not eating meat and milk and all the rules that go along with that, and the rules for ritual slaughter and the rules for um, all the
right.
whatever the other things, um, and a lot of those have. Jesus chided the Pharisees several times about their habit of um, putting precedence on the traditions above or even to the nullifying of the actual commandments.
Gotcha.
So it is unfortunate that if you ask Christians or Mormons what the law of Moses is, they will actually agree with the Pharisees instead of agreeing with Jesus. Um,
Interesting.
so this is think what Joseph, this is how I interpret Joseph's saying, is that not everything in the law of Moses will be restored, meaning all those things that Jesus chided the Pharisees about in the New Testament, like the traditions that contradict the scriptures, like none of that, which is called the law of Moses, none of that will be restored. But everything that God gave to Moses will be. And my contention tonight is that everything that God gave Moses, he also gave to the people who lived on this earth prior to Moses as well.
Gotcha.
So, okay, so got a picture there of painting of Mount Sinai, and what happened there changed the world forever. This
Right.
law code that was given is really amazing for its staying power,
Sure is.
because like there's plenty of ancient civilizations and they had laws too. But like, can you tell me anything about the Egyptian code of laws or the Assyrian code of laws or the the right the right we don't the Etruscan code of laws? There are all of those ancient law codes. Those things are studied by scholars, maybe,
Right.
uh, but like only by people who specialize in those things. And certainly there's a lot of overlap between those ancient law codes for these other nations and the law code for Israel. But even though for thousands of years Israel also was not a nation, like Israel was also gone, just like the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Babylonians were also gone. And yet there's something very persistent about the Torah, about the law that God gave to ancient Israel, that has affected the entire world, right, and Western
Right.
civilization. And even though Israel was not a nation, and even though Christians believe that the law of Moses was, quote, done away, yet it's still in our holy book, and it's still being studied and analyzed, and is instructing people's faith. Even though they believe it's done away, we can't get rid of it still, because it was so transformative
Right.
to the world. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So this of course happened in a mountain, and mountains are temples, and temples are places where covenants are made. But this Sinai, this was not the first mountain in the scriptures, obviously. And we know that like the things that God does. I mean, this is a very Mormon idea. Um, a lot of Christians and even Jews to some extent, the kind of the belief, the general idea is that God gives this progressive revelation.
Right.
And there is some truth to that, but that God reveals more and more as time goes along. But for Christians and some others, it's that God didn't actually give the whole plan to Adam, and Noah didn't really know the whole plan of salvation. Like, he knew maybe just a little more, or he didn't know really anything more than Adam, maybe. And God just kind of kept back the plan, except just bits and pieces, and gradually revealed more and more of his will and his plan for humanity up until the Christian era. And then for Christians, like, that was God finally revealed what he was up to, and then that's the end of it. Okay, the Mormon idea is no, like Adam knew everything about the plan. Okay, and so did his descendants, right? Seth and Enos and all the patriarchs. Like, they knew, they were not ignorant. And they were not ignorant, and two, God's plans haven't changed, but also people haven't changed, and so people are wicked, and people fall into apostasy, and there is continual like restoration, right? Dispensation after dispensation, but each dispensation contains, or God reveals, essentially the same information. So, you know, Ecclesiastes says, "Whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. That which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been.
Okay.
So yeah, so there's nothing new under the sun, right? This is a famous line from Ecclesiastes. Everything just keeps repeating. Um, so famous revelation by John Taylor. You know what? I'm gonna give myself a laser pointer here. Um, famous revelation. John Taylor. This is the revelation. He was asking about plural marriage, and I'm not gonna. This presentation is not about plural marriage, but this this revelation that he received was very interesting. I'm just going to point out a couple of things. Right, the Lord says, "How can I revoke an everlasting covenant?" A rhetorical question. For I, the Lord, am everlasting, and my everlasting covenants cannot be abrogated nor done away with, but they stand forever. And he goes on to say, if they were Abraham's seed and would enter into my glory, they must do the works of Abraham.
Okay.
So now this is actually quoting from section 132. Go ye therefore and do the works of Abraham, enter you into my law, and ye shall be saved. Now, in the context of 132, we often think about marriage and Abraham's marriages, but it's actually a lot more than this,
Right.
because like the Lord knew um, that that Abraham, he said that Abraham will command his children and his household after him that they shall keep the way of the Lord and do justice and judgment. And then further on, and here's where I really get to my point here, or start to get to my point here, is when the Lord is testifying to Isaac about Abraham. He says, "I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father." And he's basically Jehovah tells Isaac, "You're going to get the same blessing." And he says it's because of Abraham's faithfulness. He says, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws.
Okay.
So, so Abraham kept the commandments, the statutes, and the laws, and also the charge. And what are these things? Uh, you know, uh, we certainly don't have. Um, well, I'll say we don't really have in the Bible anyway. We don't have a record of Abraham receiving statutes, commandments, laws. We do have some individual commandments that he was
Right.
given, but statutes we don't have a record of that. And yet Jehovah testifies to Isaac that Abraham kept them all. So now it's interesting. If we want to know what was meant, then the only other place that we can look is the Torah. And in Deuteronomy chapter 11, Moses tells Israel to keep his charge, his statutes, his judgments, his commandments always. So, like Moses says to the children of Israel, keep the stuff that's in the Torah, and those things have meaning there, and we don't need to go into that. But basically, Jehovah tells Isaac that Abraham kept this commandment in Deuteronomy. Okay, but of course, Deuteronomy came centuries after Abraham.
Right.
So what's going on there? Well, this is an interesting conundrum for Christians because they believe in sola scriptura, right? So if the Bible doesn't say it, then it didn't happen. So this is
Right.
from Cambridge Bible for schools and colleges. It's a commentary right on Genesis, and it says here the observance of legal enactments ascribed to Abraham. Speaking of this, the charge, the commandments, the statutes, and the laws that we just read, says the observance of those things ascribed to Abraham is, strictly speaking, an anachronism. In other words, it's an error that's out of place in the Bible. We don't believe Abraham did those things because
Huh.
the law wasn't given to the patriarchs, until Moses.
I see. Okay. I see where they're coming from on that.
Yeah, so
Don't
that's
agree with it, right? Because And I guess that's one of the blessings of the restoration, right? Because we know that Adam offered up sacrifices, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, was told to even teach that to his posterity. And so as that goes through, um, the above statement just really doesn't hold much water if you're an adherent to the restoration.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think this is a to me it's just a very amusing example because quite often Christians kind of hammer on Mormons because they'll say we believe you only believe the Bible as far as it is translated correctly, which means you don't really believe the Bible. But here's an example of a place where we believe the Bible and they don't. So
Right,
so take that.
right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. When that gets spouted, oftentimes it's like, no, we don't believe the Bible the same way you read it, right? Like this is you
Right.
you you disagree with our consensus is what that boils.
Right. Yeah. Well, the consensus is right. So and if you don't believe what Fauci says, then you disagree with science. It's kind of like that.
Yeah.
So
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
anyway, so I'll just mention this briefly. When Jehovah says that Abraham kept my charge, um, that is actually the Hebrew word is mishmeret. That is actually it means the priest that he had the priesthood. The charge is the priesthood.
Interesting.
So also the Bible doesn't have a record of that of Abraham being ordained, but Mormon scriptures do. So we don't have a problem with that. Um, but for Christians, the patriarchal age was age of conscience and oral tradition only. But there's some real problems with this philosophy, and of course, this comes because they're trapped kind of in this sola scriptura idea, right? If the Bible doesn't say it, then it didn't happen.
Right.
Um, but here's one example. This is Sirach. This is one of the books in the Apocrypha.
Okay.
It says, "To all flesh, human and animal, but to sinners 7 times more come troubles, right? Death, blood, strife, sword, catastrophes, famine, ruin, disease. All these things were created for the lawless, so the people who don't keep the law. And because of such people, the flood happened, right? Because if there was, I mean, you just ask yourself this question: if those ancient people who lived before Moses had no law, then how just would our God be to destroy the world
Right. That's a good point.
for wickedness when He never gave them any instructions?
Right.
It would be extremely unjust, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. At that point, just and loving don't apply to the God that we would proclaim to worship, right? If he hadn't instructed them in those things, he can be neither of those things. Um,
Right.
and so it's for him to be as he says he is, he would have been like natural law says, he has to teach you those things first. They have to be
Right. And uh, and we can think of many other, like other examples too of humans being punished for wickedness without apparently having received any instructions about the difference between sin and righteousness.
right.
You know, um, right? Uh, Cain has some problems, obviously, right, with sin. But where does God ever say, don't kill your brother?
Right.
Um, animals do that,
Right.
right? I mean, if uh, someone, the younger wolf is challenging the alpha male, and they have a battle, and one of them dies. that's just the
Right.
way it is, you know?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say the wolf or the chimpanzee or whatever, like they're not, I don't know that they're sinning. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know what commandments animals have, but if humans have received no instruction from their creator, then then how is that any different? You see, it's just a struggle for dominance,
Right.
and what could be ethically wrong with that?
Right. Right. Yeah, no. So yeah, that's an interesting point too, right? Because the Bible doesn't specifically say that there were commandments given about, you shall not kill, but obviously God's not happy with the outcome between Cain and Abel. And
Right?
again, God being both just and loving, they had to have known, Cain would have had to have known that, hey, don't do that. Um,
Yeah. In
Interesting.
fact,
Yep.
God calls it sin. Right?
Hmm.
He says, you better be careful, Cain. Like if you do well, then things will be good. But if not, sin lies at the door.
Right.
And sin is a technical term. Sin means a violation of the law.
Right.
So we know actually um, that that Cain and Abel and Adam, right? They had the law, or
Right.
at least they had some laws. Okay, I don't want to overstate my case here, but just because the Bible doesn't say it doesn't mean that it didn't happen, and we can definitely, I think, like with confidence, infer um, that they had some things. Sodom and Gomorrah is another example, right? These cities are destroyed, um, and again, we have no record of any of them ever being instructed in righteous living.
Right.
But we can infer from what we know about God, right, that He is just. That this had to have happened, right? Uh, this is a necessity. Like the lectures on faith say that, like believing, like knowing about the justice of God is one of the essential features or one of the essential bits of information that we need to know, like to have a correct understanding of God's character, so that we
Right.
can have faith in Him, right?
Yep.
Um, so, so there's one, and we could come up with many other examples. Okay. Another problem with this idea of there being no like revelation, no recorded revelation, is and just relying upon like some oral tradition or something like that, is
Right.
that man's memory is fallible too,
Yeah.
right? And we have really good. There's actually several places in the Book of Mormon, um, where they talk. I mean, Nephi, and his brothers, they go back to Jerusalem to get the brass plates so that they can have the commandments.
Yeah.
Okay, and if they didn't, then the Lord tells them, if you don't have the commandments written down, then like the entire nation will perish, dwindle in unbelief,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that is 100% true, and it's true for two reasons. One, man's memory is faulty. So here in Mosiah, right, the last kind of sentence here, right, says, or last line, see the last sentence, for it were not possible that our father Lehi could have remembered all of these things to have taught them to his children, except it were for the help of these plates, the brass plates. So, yeah. And the other reason is that even if your memory isn't fallible, man's conscience is fallible. And so, uh, you know, we love to lie. We love to lie. We lie to ourselves and we lie to other people, maybe more than we care to admit sometimes. But if God just left the transmission of his laws to mankind, they would forget them and also lie about them. And,
Yeah.
tell people that things are okay when they are not okay, and vice versa. So,
Okay.
okay. Now, if we want to know whether or not the law existed before Moses, and we kind of already touched on this, we could ask actually an equivalent question: was there sin before Moses?
Okay.
Um, because in both the New Testament and in the Book of Mormon, we have things here. It says, where there is no law, there's no transgression, right? This in Romans. In Second Nephi, if you say there's no law, you shall say there's no sin. So those are equivalent things. So just so there's the question: was there sin before Moses? And we given some examples already. Absolutely, there was.
Right.
There was Cain and Abel, and Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Tower of Babel, and like all these punishments, the flood with Noah, all these punishments that are happening because of sin before the law was given, apparently, right? Yeah, the New Testament says sin is the transgression of the law. So there's that legal definition there, and Romans goes on, says death. Let's see. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered the world, and death by sin, so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. Skimming down, nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses. Why did death reign from Adam to Moses? Because sin existed from Adam to Moses. Right. This is what the New Testament says. So the answer is yes, there definitely was sin. Therefore, and since sin is the transgression of the law, there absolutely was law.
Okay.
So, and this is Mormons should be very comfortable with this idea. There's this really excellent article. It's actually in series. I can't remember. It's a 3 or 4 part series in the Evening and Morning Star. So this is kind of some extracts from that. I'll just read it. This is Joseph Smith. We shall now proceed to examine still further the subject of law. However little may have been heretofore thought or said upon the subject of law does not diminish in the least the propriety nor the design of it, since it emanated from God. And though it may have been and may be at this day a subject untouched by the professors of Christianity, that does not lessen its value, neither does it diminish its power in judging men from their actions according to it at the last day.
Wow.
Continuing on, we all admit that the gospel has ordinances. And if so, had it not always ordinances? And were not the ordinances always the same? Perhaps our friends will say that the gospel and its ordinances were not known until the days of John, the son of Zacharias, in the days of Herod, the king of Judea. But we will here look at this point. For our own part, we cannot believe that the ancients in all ages were so ignorant of the system of heaven as many suppose, since all that were ever saved were saved through the power of this great plan of redemption, as much so before the coming of Christ as since. If not, God has had different plans in operation, if we may so express it, to bring men back to dwell with himself, and this we cannot believe, since there has been no change in the constitution of man since he fell.
Yeah. Now, see, that one, I that's one of those ones that I think, as you think about it, carries quite a bit of weight when you start talking about the character of God. Because if all of a sudden God was to say, you know what, we're changing up the whole program, right?
Right.
You then turn God, and it's based on, because I've heard this before when people start to justify things whenever temple changes come around in the LDS church. One of the arguments I've heard for that is, well, we're different people than they were, right? Like,
yeah,
we're no longer barbarians or this sort of thing. Well, the issue I have with that is that, granted, I will say that, we aren't quite as barbaric for the most part, right? There's less murder in the world today than certainly years and years ago. However, man's heart, I don't think is that much different, right?
It's a veneer.
It's a veneer, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes, well, that buddy of mine who's an emergency manager, said something that really spooked me one day. He's like, look, the entire world, the Western world, is 3 meals away from barbarism, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely. Chaos, anarchy, absolutely.
Right. One of the reasons that we don't have that now is because we have plenty of food to go around, right? He's like, when that goes away, Absolutely. Men will do horrible things. But for more than that, if that's the case, right? If God looks back in the 1800s and he says, I instituted these temple ordinances, but you know what? Gosh, yeah, I don't think we need this part anymore, and we can just do this. You've turned God into a respecter of persons, which he says over
Right.
and over again, he is not, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, as you were just saying, as humans, we have a tendency to lie, right? And we have a tendency to protect ourselves through lies, right? Some of the most damning lies I think that ever get told for most people aren't lies about other people, they're lies about ourselves, right? Hey, you know what? I got this
100%.
figured out. I'm good. I'm okay. But the truth is that we're probably not as awesome as we think we are, right? The ego, the look, ego is necessary, right? I want to say that because without ego, we would all be quivering masses under the table, realizing how filthy and loathsome we are, right? Like,
Yeah.
we can't walk around all the time with like, oh, I'm lower than low, right? I mean, we need to be
Yeah.
humble, but we also have to understand we're still children of God and we have a divine
Yeah.
spark. That said, I don't think man has changed to such a point where God's like, yeah, I think we can go ahead and alter these laws, right? We can go ahead and we can just change ordinances because you know what? They're a different group of people now. Um,
No.
change that, and what you're basically saying is, I'm special, and those things don't apply to me anymore.
You know what, too, if you have a God who's just changing his mind all the time, uh, and this is said with some jest here, but if you have a God that's just fickle like that, then your God might be Zeus or
Right.
Jupiter or like one of the Greek or Roman gods or whatever. And these uh, these gods of these ancient pantheons, like they were fickle. They changed their minds.
Yep.
And you know why that was? It occurs to me that I mean it's because these while I believe there are like real spiritual entities behind the worship of these these pagan heathen gods. For the most part, like these gods were worshipped as idols, right?
Yep.
The humans would carve statues. In other words, like humans would make these gods in their image.
Right.
And when you make a god in your image, then it's going to be as fickle as
Yeah.
man is.
Absolutely.
And but uh, but it's not that way. Like we are the ones made in God's image, and not the other way around. And so we need to conform rather than conform God to us, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So okay, well, Joseph Smith goes on. I'm not going to read the next part of it, but he basically says from the very beginning, God gave, um, God gave uh, every. I am going to read part of it. I said I wasn't, but here I am. God gave every necessary law and instruction for the peace, happiness, and future comfort, and living for man. And he goes on to say to suppose that this is toward the ends of the last sentence here. Suppose that the Maker of the universe never gave to man any law after he had formed him would, in our opinion, be offering an insult to his glorious character and be comparing him beneath even an earthly parent. Like it would make God a worse parent than fallen mortals to say God did not give instruction, like, and not just a little bit of instruction, but every necessary law and instruction.
Right.
Okay. So this goes back to this Mount Sinai. This was not the first mountain in the scriptures. The first mountain was Eden, but
Right.
I'm gonna get to that in just a minute. But when we think about the law that was given at Mount Sinai, and we see paintings and movies and things with Moses coming down with the tablets. The tablets look like this. They're they're stone. It's kind of brown or gray stone usually, but The scriptures actually have something interesting to say, right? Um, of course, they're always interesting, but something particularly interesting I'm going to point out here. Most of the children of Israel were afraid to go up, right? And they said to Moses, "We want you to go up in the mountain." And Moses did, um, along with 70 of the elders. And they went up there. And in Exodus 24, it says they had this theophany. God appeared to them. They actually were ushered into God's throne room, and they saw this sapphire stone in there in this room. There's this sapphire floor where
Right.
they were. They ate a meal with God there, um, and says it was blue and it was as clear as heaven.
Wow.
Okay, and then pretty amazing. And then in so that's in verse 10, this sapphire stone, and then in verse 12, so just a couple verses later. The Lord says, "I will give you tables of stone, law and commandments, which I have written." So this is a slight mistranslation. This tables of stone. Um, so in so I just have this phrase here. I'll give thee tables of stone. So in Hebrew, stone, the word is evan. There it is. And in Hebrew, there is a common prefix, which is ha, which is attached to the beginning of words, and it means the, or like the. It's like the definite article. So we're talking about a
Okay.
particular thing. If we put ha on the beginning of a word. So in Exodus 24, verse 12, it actually says ha evan. So like a more appropriate translation is I'll give you tables of the stone. So
Interesting.
which stone? Well, there's only one stone that's mentioned in the whole chapter, and it's this one, the
Sapphire.
sapphire. Yeah, the sapphire that was in the throne room in God's, like, it is like part of God's throne. So rather than the tablets of stone looking like this, they actually looked like this.
Wow. See, that looks cooler.
It's way cooler.
That
And
looks
also
cooler, right? Like that's something I could see a Marvel villain really wanting to get his hands on. Right? I mean, that looks awesome.
yes,
Um,
the
you
cube
know,
of destiny, something. Yeah,
yeah, there's something else, and this is kind of a side tangent, so forgive me here. But what was the number of elders? And I've read this before. What was the number
70.
of elders that went up? 70, right?
You got it. Yeah,
I've often wondered if that's not a prelude some way to the office of 70
absolutely. Yeah,
in
yeah.
in,
The
in the priesthood, right?
absolutely. And when I mean the whole. Yeah, that's right. The um like the priesthood, or some people might say the church, if they don't um, make a distinction there. But the organization is there's three guys that form the first presidency. Okay, and then the next quorum is 12, and then the next is 70.
Right.
And I believe this structure is again an eternal thing, um, but it's a priesthood structure, and it's a family structure too,
Yep.
because you look at ancient Israel, and Israel, like the family of Israel, begins with three.
Right.
These are the patriarchs: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Jacob has 12,
Right.
and then it says, and then Jacob grows, and when they go into Egypt, when the family goes into Egypt, says there are. Do you know how many?
No.
70.
Ha! Ha! So it just repeats.
Yeah. So this is the so now I don't believe that um, the family of Israel being 3, 12, 70 is trying to point us towards the church. I actually think that the church hierarchy, or the priesthood hierarchy is actually pointing us towards Israel, and like reminding us that this is this family that we're going to be that we're supposed to be emulating and be a part of.
Right.
Okay, so Eden was a mountain as well, right? How do we know that? Well, there's a couple of clues. Okay, this is a 12th century like illuminated manuscript, and it shows Eden here, and it's like this mountainous region, right? In Genesis, it says a river went out of Eden to water the garden. So, which direction do rivers flow? Downhill,
Downhill.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So Eden was lifted up higher than the land round about it.
Right.
In Ezekiel as well, I don't have that here, but Ezekiel explicitly calls Eden the mountain of the Lord.
Right.
And there are also some other like apocryphal works that talk about Adam and Eve being when they were kicked out, that they went like down lower.
Yes.
And so anyway, Eden was a mountain as well, and mountains are temples, and temples are places where covenants are given. Okay, and now the Bible doesn't say this, but Restoration Scripture does say this, right? That Adam kept records. Like
Right.
Adam was not ignorant. Adam was intelligent and had the plan revealed to him, and he wrote it down along with his revelations and his explanations, and also his genealogy, right?
Right.
So this book of remembrance and the book of genealogy was kept by Adam, and those were not only kept but handed down. And so here's kind of the answer to the mystery about Abraham, and how is Abraham keeping the things that Moses says in Deuteronomy, his charge, statutes, judgments, and laws. How is he doing that? Because we have more Restoration Scripture. This is from the book of Abraham. Says, I shall delineate the chronology running back from myself to the beginning of creation, for the records have come into my hands. Okay, so Abraham has the records that were kept by Adam and passed down through the patriarchs. Okay, and what did they have? Well, we know from Genesis 26 that those records had, among other things, they had my commandments, my statutes, and my laws, just like Moses tells to Israel in the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, now, here's another interesting line of evidence, and I wish I would have given you this as kind of homework to look at earlier, because it takes a little bit of you don't see it at first, but once you see it, then you can't unsee it, I guess. So we know that the now there's some debate maybe about what happens after Jesus comes, but I don't really want to talk about that right now. As Joseph Smith says, that the things that were before Moses are going to be restored. So I just want to talk about the things that were before Moses that we know are going to be restored, and not necessarily what happens to the law of Moses or the supposed law of Moses like after. That's a topic for another time. But this is the painting of Alma and Amulek. So Alma and Amulek, this is chapter 12. They're debating with Zeezrom and Antiona about the plan of redemption. And so Alma explains that there were two sets of commandments given to Adam. So let's see. I'm going to read. If you don't mind, I'll just read this.
Yeah.
So we get the context. I did take out some of the, people can go and read what's in the ellipses there, but I have just kept kind of the pertinent parts just to get to the point. After God had appointed that these things, so this is the death and the fall, should come unto man. Behold, then he saw that it was expedient that man should know concerning the things whereof he had appointed unto them. Okay, this is what Joseph Smith says. Like God like gave to, starting with Adam, gave them all the laws and instructions they needed, right? What is this life going to be about? What are the expectations? What are the laws? What is sin? What is righteousness? What are the penalties? What are the blessings? Okay. And if you do mess up, how do you fix that?
Right.
What restitution is required? What punishment is needed? How do we repent? And how do you get back into God's good graces if you choose to? So anyway, so man needed to know all the things whereof he had appointed unto them. Therefore, God conversed with men and made known unto them the plan of redemption, which had been prepared from the foundation of the world. Actually, I just want to pause right here. Well, let me read this bold part here. Wherefore he gave second commandments unto men, they having first transgressed the first commandments. Right. So Adam got some first commandments. Those were broken. They got expelled. So God gave them new commandments, second commandments. I put that in there. But this is in contrast to what Alma says are the first commandments. So the interesting thing here is the Book of Mormon says that these instructions, right, the plan of redemption and the things that God had appointed for man, these had been prepared from the foundation of the world. And this is where Mormon ideas and Jewish ideas actually come together very beautifully, because although most Jews, I think, don't believe that the Torah was given until Moses.
Right.
There is disagreement, though. Like the rabbis disagree with each other. There's a famous saying, like you ask two rabbis a question and you'll get three opinions, that kind of thing.
Right. Right. Yeah.
It's like asking fundamentalist questions too, probably.
Yeah,
But
it is.
anyway, Jewish tradition in a number of places, they say that the Torah was prepared from the foundation of the world. Like the Torah was pre-existent.
Okay.
And
So
actually, go ahead.
I was going to say that it makes sense, right? God, like, I don't think God's ever caught unaware, right? Like, I never imagine God going, "Well, I
Yeah.
didn't see that one coming." Does anybody,
Yeah.
so
God's like, we're gonna start this thing, and we'll just kind of wing it as we go. We don't have a plan. We'll make up a plan as we go. Like, no. It was all planned out. All the details were known and communicated. So
it's the exact opposite of how I run this podcast, right? I mean, like,
correct.
he knows how it's all going to unfold. It's going to, he's got it covered, right? And so this idea that God was caught flat-footed and went, well, I guess I better give him laws now, right? No,
Yeah, that plan didn't work.
yeah, that
Yeah.
plan didn't work. Let's see what else we can get to stick against the wall, right? That's not how
Yeah.
it works, right? These plans were well established before mortality. And boy, you can really blow your mind when you start looking at certain parts of like Adam God doctrine or one of those things, and you start getting into this whole pattern of the gods, right? And so this idea that again somehow we're special and we just keep somehow catch God flat-footed is kind of a silly premise.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, that's the way the pagan gods operate.
Right.
Is they just fly by the seat of their pants and change their plans, and they thwart each other's plans all the time. And they're messing with mortals and messing with each other, and
Right.
our gods are not like that. So okay, so he gave them these second commandments. They having first transgressed the first commandments, placing themselves in a state to act, or being placed in a state to act according to their wills and pleasures, whether to do evil or to do good. Therefore, God gave unto them commandments, the second commandments, after having made known to them the plan of redemption, that they should not do evil, the penalty thereof being a second death,
Mm.
which was an everlasting death as to things pertaining unto righteousness. For on such the plan of redemption could have no power, for the works of justice could not be destroyed according to the supreme goodness of God. Okay, now here's a question for you. Alma and Amulek, they lived BC or AD?
BC.
BC, okay? And according to the plain testimony of the Book of Mormon, which law were Alma and Amulek keeping?
Law of Moses.
Law of Moses. Yeah, it's I don't know, half a dozen places in the Book of Mormon they like to say yes, we kept the law of Moses. They had an understanding of Messiah and of redemption through Christ, and they I would say they understood the proper place of the law, and and I agree with that. But they absolutely were keeping the law. So interesting. Then the next thing that Alma says, continuing in that same chapter, now, my brethren, seeing that we know these things about the fall of Adam and about the plan of redemption and about the second commandments given to him, seeing we know these things and they are true, let us repent and harden not our hearts, that we provoke not the Lord our God to pull down his wrath upon us in these his second commandments, which he has given unto us. But let us enter into the rest of God, which is prepared according to his word.
Mm.
Okay, Alma is saying that these second commandments, which God has given to us, is like he's saying that those second commandments that God gave to Adam, that is the law of Moses. That is what Alma and Amulek are saying.
Interesting. Okay. All
Okay.
right. Yep.
So yeah, which commandments had God given to Alma and Amulek? These ones, right? So, okay. Well, so even if the Bible doesn't explicitly mention records given to Adam, passed down to the days of Moses, we have these witnesses. Okay, there's just reason we can reason based upon God's justice and eternal nature, and also the fallenness of man, like that God is not going to leave us without instruction or leave us to instruct each other without having some standard from him. Teachings of the Joseph Smith on the subject, the JST or the Joseph Smith Targum, I say here kind of tongue in cheek, but in the Book of Moses, okay, I read some quotes from that earlier. The Book of Abraham says this. The Book of Mormon we just read, and there are actually other kind of apocryphal works that talk very clearly about the law being given since Adam, like before Moses. So now the Bible doesn't explicitly mention that, and even in the Book of Abraham, things like it says that there were records, but it doesn't give us very much detail about what was on it. However, if those ancient people before Moses had the law, then we would expect there to be kind of some echoes, at
Right.
least like mentions of things in the law being commandments or observed prior to the law being given. And so in order to kind of find out where those things are, we're really going to have just a couple of places to look. One is Genesis,
Right.
because that occurred, and of course the Book of Moses. That occurred before Mount Sinai, the Book of Abraham. Okay, the first part of Exodus is also before Sinai, and then the Book of Job. Actually, the Book of Job is also a lot of people believe, a lot of scholars believe that Job is actually the oldest book, like that Job was written prior to Moses' time.
Really?
Okay? Although Job may have been a contemporary of Moses or lived around that time. Yes, Job is the oldest. Job is the oldest book that we have. So those are kind of the places that we're going to look for these things. And I actually went through and I asked some other people to kind of brainstorm with me too. And this is actually not the full list of things that I found, but these are all things, and I'll just read this list. These are all things that are in people's mind are very clearly associated with the law of Moses, that we actually have a record of these things being observed in the scriptures prior to Sinai. So the biblical calendar, Sabbath, animal sacrifice of various kinds, firstlings, Passover, animal sacrifice in general, the different, like the types of animals that are appropriate to sacrifice is mentioned. The commandment to teach children, sabbatical years, laws for servants, laws about murder, prohibition on murder, penalty for murder, law of witnesses, cities of refuge, restrictions on intermarriage with non-Israelites or non-covenant lines,
Right.
incest, various sorts are discussed. Plural marriage is talked about. Forbidden plural marriages, allowed and forbidden plural marriages. Homosexuality, levirate marriage, adultery, bribes, circumcision, clean and unclean animals for food, right? Stealing, kidnapping, lying, ritual purity, Shavuot, which is Pentecost, things about the priesthood, things about tithing, worshiping of idols, eating blood, returning blood to the dust, temples, dividing the land by lot, first fruits offerings, slavery, the Feast of Tabernacles, the Day of Atonement, prostitution, loving God, being righteousness in judgment, Feast of Trumpets, priestly robes, and I actually have some other ones on another list that I've kind of come up with. The construction of altars, just weights and measures, blaspheming God. There's a few more that I've added actually since this presentation, and maybe we'll get to those, maybe we won't. But
Okay.
anyway, so there's a lot of things actually, like a surprising number of things that are I think in our minds are generally associated with the law of Moses that were actually pretty clearly understood and being observed before that time.
Right.
And my contention is that those things were always observed because God's laws are eternal. And so the calendar itself, like, it begins on the fourth day of creation. God says He made the sun, the moon, and the stars for days and months, and for signs and for seasons. And seasons, in the King James, it's seasons. But that in Hebrew is the Moedim. That's the appointed times. Those are the festival days.
Right.
The Passover, the Sabbath, the Passover, the unleavened bread, and Pentecost, and all the other feast days. We've done podcasts about those things. God says from the beginning, like before man is even placed in the garden, I'm setting up a calendar. So that calendar that's later on described in Leviticus was actually put into place from the very beginning. Okay, so I have a couple examples, and we can talk about some more, probably just like briefly. But this is a story. It's one of the first stories in the Bible. We're all familiar with it. Cain and Abel, they bring their offerings.
Right.
And of course, Abel, we know he brings his vegetables, right, the fruits of the ground. Abel brings his a lamb, the firstlings of the lambs, and so we all know that. But there's an interesting detail that probably people haven't noticed or just gloss over. But this is Genesis 4. Abel brought the firstlings of his flock, and of the fat thereof. Okay, you ever notice that before?
I've noticed that. Yeah, but to be honest with you, and I'll tell you how I interpreted it, and then you get to correct me. So
Okay.
how I've thought about that is when you think of the fat thereof, I think of abundance, right? And I've often thought, is this kind of an injunction about bringing the best that you have of
Yeah.
your flocks?
I would say yes and no. It is literal fat, and it's not just the best. There are actually specific laws about firstlings. So that is the
Okay.
first male child of any of your cattle, and whether we're talking about actually it's any of your animals. You are supposed to offer to the Lord. So here it is. This is the commandment in the Torah. This is in Numbers chapter 18. But the firstling of a cow, or the firstling of a sheep, or the firstling of a goat, they are holy. Thou shalt sprinkle their blood upon the altar, and shalt burn their fat for an offering made by fire, for a sweet savor unto the Lord. So here we have Abel keeping the commandment in the book of Numbers, okay, thousands of years before the book of Numbers was given or written down. And how is he doing that? Well, that's because what Alma and Amulek say is the law that Moses was given was the commandments that Adam was given. And Adam taught.
Fascinating.
Okay. So, okay. So that's pretty amazing. Now Adam would have been the first high priest. Okay. And he would have been the one who received the offerings, and performed those functions. So, okay, so there's one kind of interesting example that maybe people had not noticed before, but interesting details. Here's another one. Okay, going to talk about incest here. So, everyone's favorite topic. It's just teasing. Leviticus 18 is where kind of the laws about incest are spelled out. Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20 as well. But it says, the nakedness of thy sister, the daughter of thy father, or the daughter of thy mother, thou shalt not uncover. So this is allowing, it says, incest between siblings or half siblings. That's what this is saying, right? So if you have, even if it's from a different mother, if it's from the same father,
it's a big name.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Now, this happens. This happens after. This is after Sinai, when Leviticus is written down.
Right.
But prior to Sinai, we know that incest was not allowed then, because of Abraham's word playing to save his life, right? Calling Sarai his sister.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Why did he call Sarai his sister? It's so that Abimelech first, right? Abimelech would thought that Abram was saying, well, she's not my wife because I wouldn't be marrying my sister, obviously, because everybody knows that incest is wrong, even though Leviticus had not been given. Okay.
Fascinating. Yep.
Okay. Now, so let's read that. It's in Genesis 12. It came to pass when he was come near into Egypt that he said unto Sarai his wife, Behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. So again, I said, right, the normal assumption then was that brothers and sisters do not marry, thus the reaction of Pharaoh. So yep. Pharaoh was the second. It was Abimelech first, and then Pharaoh second, right? They do this trick twice. Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this that thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? Why saidst thou, She is my sister? So I might have taken her to me to wife. Now therefore, behold thy wife, take her, go thy way.
Right.
So, okay. So in that story, it doesn't say explicitly that incest is not allowed, right? We don't get that explicitly until Leviticus, but it's definitely implied, right? So here's a question to Abraham: Who is Sarai? Like genealogically? Okay, I mean she is his
cousin?
Wife.
Well, right.
But they're related in another way, and we'll get to Lot in a minute here. But when so this is Pharaoh. When Abimelech asks him the same thing as Pharaoh, then Abram tells Abimelech, "Indeed, she is my sister, she is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. So it sounds like Sarai is Abram's half sister, which the Torah forbids. Right, we read that in
Right.
Leviticus 18, and yet we have Jehovah testifying to Isaac that Abraham kept my laws, my statutes, my judgments, my commandments.
So,
Okay,
Josh, can I put something forward here?
please.
When we're dealing with the patriarchs, we're dealing with a lot of patriarchal order, right?
Yeah,
Now, Sarai would have joined, well, that might not necessarily hold water because Abraham's father wasn't necessarily seeking after the blessings of the fathers like
no,
Abraham was.
correct.
But maybe culturally he could still say that because she joined Abraham's household,
Ooh,
which would
yeah.
have theoretically been, right, you know, father-in-law, that sort of thing, right? Kind of a semantics there,
Father-in-law.
kind of
Yeah.
semantics there. And
Okay,
maybe
so
that's how he got away with it.
you're onto something. So a lot of times people will say, yeah, Abraham married his half sister, but he hadn't been commanded not to, so God excused that, you know. Um, but you have to, in order to believe that, you have to reject what Jehovah said to Isaac,
Right.
and you also, and of course, if you're a child of the Restoration, then you have to reject, what the Book of Mormon and the Book of Moses and the Book of Abraham say about God's law being passed down from Adam. So that's a tricky thing to say, but there's another place in Genesis, interesting. Genesis 11 says something a little bit different, but along the lines that you were getting at, I think. So that was cool. Terah, that's Abram's father, right? Took Abram his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law.
Yep. Okay.
Not his daughter, but says Sarai is Terah's daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife. And they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan, and they came into Haran and dwelt there. So, interesting that so it can is a daughter-in-law a daughter, a kind of daughter?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so here, when Abram says, well, she is the daughter of my father. In other words, like she's part of my father's family, by
Right.
marriage here, but not the daughter of my mother. So not my blood, not my blood sister, is kind of what he's saying.
Right.
And we kind of use the term sister, brother and sister in a metaphorical way too, like more than just biological, right?
Right. Can,
So
can I say
yeah,
one other thing too that jumped out
yeah,
at me as you were reading these? There seems to be like it, and I think this supports the idea that the law was around even before Moses, right?
yeah,
Because even Pharaoh understands this,
that's right.
right? Even
Yeah,
Pharaoh acknowledges this. And Pharaoh then goes on and acknowledges it even more with, like, I could have ended up laying with your wife, bro. Right. So that seems to be
yeah.
repugnant to him as well. Right. And we start looking
Pharaoh
at,
is acknowledging. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And
It's
so
multiple things
even
going on.
Pharaoh himself, right? And it does say in the Pearl of Great Price that Pharaoh, by all accounts, was a righteous man, right? Tried to
Correct.
imitate the orders of the fathers. So of
Right.
course he would be repulsed by that idea of, whew, I dodged a bullet. I almost laid with another
Yeah,
man's wife, and then like get your crap and get out of my country, right? Like
yeah.
you almost had me screw up here, bro. And so even Pharaoh
Exactly.
seems to acknowledge the law here in this.
Yeah, which is if you don't have okay, if you don't have the restoration scriptures, okay, that talks about Pharaoh being righteous, um and Abram apparently didn't know that Pharaoh was a righteous man,
Nope.
because he says Pharaoh is not going to care about adultery.
Right.
He says, if I say you're my wife, you belong to me, then they'll say, well, let's get rid of this man so that we can take his, what's his.
Right.
But Pharaoh is worried both about adultery and about incest, right? So Pharaoh knows about these things somehow. Of course, we know the answer.
Yep.
So the Hebrew word for sister is ahoti, and it just like in English, this is used as a biological term, but also idiomatically. So just mean
Okay.
a kinswoman, or even just someone who's shares some either and similar term for brother. We call people brothers at church. We
Yep.
call we're our fellow soldiers, or our brothers in arms, or whatever. Our fellow lodge members, or whatever, are our brothers or our sisters. And in Hebrew, those terms are used idiomatically in the same way too.
Right.
So, okay, so to Lot, just as another example of this, what's the relationship between Lot and Abraham?
Isn't, correct me if I'm wrong. I could be wrong here. Wasn't Lot his nephew?
That is correct. Biologically, his nephew. But in Genesis 14 says Abraham brought back all the goods and brought again his brother Lot. Okay, and his goods. This is after Lot is Lot's tangled up in the wars of the kings. And Abraham rescues him. But here says Lot is his brother. Lot is not his biological brother, but he's his brother in the faith. His brother as far as his like kinsman. And so anyway, okay, now there's one other interesting thing here, okay, that I'm gonna go to. So this is Genesis 11 again. So Abram had two brothers, Haran and Nahor. And Haran, so let me just read this. This is the genealogy of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. So there's his brothers. I could have just read that. Haran begat Lot. So there's the nephew, right? Abram's
Right.
brother Haran has Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in his native land in Ur of the Chaldeans. Then Abram and Nahor, so those are the two living brothers, they took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren; she had no child. So what this is saying is, so Haran has here it lists three children that Haran has. One son named Lot, and Haran has Milcah, the daughter of Haran, and also Haran has another daughter named Iscah. Okay,
Okay.
so there's three children. It says, but Haran dies, and then it says Abram and Nahor took wives. So it says here Nahor took one of Haran's daughters, and then let's see. Oh, it says they took wives. Sorry, Abram took Sarai, and Nahor took Milcah, and then it lists these two daughters of Haran, Milcah and Iscah, and then it immediately follows it. But Sarai was barren. Now, in this translation we have a period there. In the original Hebrew, there was not a period.
Okay.
Okay, and this clause right here, but Sarai was barren, was actually understood to be an explanatory note about Iscah. So Sarai is another name for Iscah.
Oh, okay.
So, in other words, the ancient interpretation of this verse was that Haran had three children that are named anyway, son named Lot, and then two daughters, Milcah and Iscah, who is also known as Sarai. Haran dies, and then his brothers, Abram and Nahor, they marry his two daughters, Milcah and Sarai. Okay, so this is just to show you this was the ancient tradition. Okay, this is a Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews. Josephus is a contemporary of Jesus.
Yep.
Okay. Abram had two brethren, Nahor and Haran. Of these, Haran left a son, Lot, as also Sarai and Milcah, his daughters. Okay. And died among the Chaldeans in the city of the Chaldeans called Ur. And his monument is shown to this day. These, Nahor and Haran, these married their nieces. So now the question is, like incest, between siblings is not allowed, and actually, interesting, between nephews and aunts is also forbidden. But uncles marrying nieces is not against the Torah. And so this is just showing that if you get into the details here, Abram was not in violation of Leviticus 18, marrying his half sister. The truth of the matter was she was his niece, and that is allowed. And so Abram was not breaking or violating any of the commandments there.
Okay.
So that was kind of a long explanation, but it's just interesting, I think, that shows that. Now, I'm going to let's see. So I'm going to actually end this and close that. And now I have a few. I don't know, any thoughts on this to this point, I guess.
No, it's fascinating to see that not only was there obviously law there, but just how widely adhered to it was, right? Even in some places where we don't expect, like in Egypt, right? There are echoes of it that even those who maybe have gone away from the family, right, so to speak,
Right.
still feel compelled to live by those things, right?
Yeah. Right.
The other thing that I was noticing, and this is kind of a side tangent, is I was looking at those list of laws that you had. Those are very civilizing laws, right?
Yeah.
Like we look at civilization when people start talking about the first civilized um societies, we tend to go to Egypt, or we tend to go to Rome or Greece or something like that. But in all actuality, if we look at the Bible, which certainly predates those, we can see these civilizing laws there, right? And that without it, man really does kind of devolve back into, I shouldn't say back into, because I'm not a believer in evolution, but devolves into an animal.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I agree. And a lot of these, a lot of the laws, some of the ceremonial things aside, a lot of the other laws, although like a lot of those things are just like they're actually necessary for
Yeah.
society to function. So
And I think, look, it's kind of funny, right? The more technologically advanced we seem to be becoming now, the less lawful we are, right? I mean, we're in a time now where, a lot of those laws aren't necessarily as taboo as they once were, right? I mean,
that's true.
you can look at, things like the one about
We
prostitution,
are
right? With that,
weakening the fabric.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'll just go through these kind of quickly. But the fifth commandment, like the Big Ten, is honor the Sabbath. Okay.
Right.
Was that a thing before Sinai?
I would
I
say
mean,
so. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, from the very beginning, God says He rested on the seventh
Right.
day. Okay, and also when the Israelites are out in the wilderness, like one, after just right after they've left um, Egypt, um, the manna starts, and
Right.
God tells them, "You're going to keep my Sabbath, and I'm going to
Right.
see if you're going to keep my law." And this is like before the covenant happened at Sinai, where
Oh,
they
that's a
have
great
the
point.
manna for 6 days. They have the manna for 6 days, and then it doesn't come on the seventh. And for 50 days between Passover and Shavuot, they're practicing keeping
Yeah.
the Sabbath. And it seems like the language that God uses there is like, you already know, this is my law. He says before he actually gives them the law, like formally, they're doing this. So
Well, and here's the other thing, right? I wonder again, it because it doesn't seem like it's that foreign to him, right? That's not one because look, we have records throughout Exodus and Leviticus. The children of Israel are bumbling their way through this whole thing, right? And they're
yes,
questioning God at every turn, right? I go back to one of my favorite stories where they sent Moses says sends spies out to go look at the land, and then the evil report comes back like, hey, it's a great land, but there's a whole bunch of guys back there, and they're like, oh, I'm not gonna go, and God gets angry, Moses intercedes, and then they say, oh, I don't want to wander 40 years, so let's go do it now, right? So
right,
they don't seem to have a problem trying to second guess God a lot, but for whatever reason, the Sabbath law there, they're like, well, yeah, of course, right? I mean, there's no pushback on that, right? So
yeah,
again, was there a form of Sabbath even in Egypt, right? Like what
yeah.
are we
Actually,
looking at?
there are apocryphal sources that say that Moses, when Moses was prince in Egypt,
Right.
uh, that Moses made sure that the Israelites, when they were slaves, that Moses made sure that they got a Sabbath,
Right.
even theirs. So like
Right.
while they were slaves still. So yeah. Okay, so there's one. So altars. The first time we have instructions for building an altar is in Exodus chapter 21 or 22, I think. And God says you either need to make it out of you know earth or uncut stones, and that's how you're going to do it. But we have in the book of Moses, we have Adam making an altar. We have Abel, we have Noah, we have Abraham. They're all making altars, even though there was no commandment to do that. No
Right.
command recorded commandment, not until the law of Moses was given. But there we have it. Let's see. I mentioned um, those things. I won't get into. There's a lot of animal sacrifice that
Yep.
goes on. Not only Sabbaths, but actually Sabbath years too. So Sabbath years or sabbatical years, these are cycles of 7 years. And we have these interesting, right? We get instructions about this in Leviticus 25. The seventh year shall be a Sabbath, and also the Jubilee years, right? Hallow the
Right.
50th year. And also we have laws about servants, indentured servants serving 6 years he shall serve, and in the seventh he shall go out free. Okay. So then we have Jacob showing up poor at Laban's house
Right.
and serving for 7 years
Yep.
for to pay his way, and also to pay for his wife. He gets two wives out of the deal, so he works two terms of 7 years back to back. But that term of 7 years uh, of servitude, like that's a law of Moses thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this is happening. This is happening in Genesis, right before Moses was on the scene. Okay, we talked about murder already. Um, Actually, interesting. Uh, well, I don't want to get into that. Well, I will say, like in the law of Moses, the punishment for murder is death.
Right.
Um, it's interesting. Even after the law of Moses is given, murderers don't always die. Like David, right? David's guilty of murder.
Right.
Uriah. David doesn't get put to death. Why not?
I don't know.
I'll tell you why. Because there's no witnesses.
Oh, okay.
Because except God, I mean, God knows everything, but
Right.
God doesn't. God doesn't. And no one's getting away with anything.
Right.
Okay. Eventually, everyone will make a record of all their deeds and words and thoughts. So no one's getting away with anything. But here on this stage, this mortal stage, God has said, no one's going to be punished for anything, even murder, unless there's witnesses against them. That's what we're going to do. And this is why. When there's the adulterous woman in John chapter 8, right?
Right.
They bring the woman, and there is a trap for Jesus. Is he gonna obey the law and thereby defy the Roman law? Is he going to keep the Torah and defy the Roman law and be
Right.
guilty of sedition, or is he going to go with the Roman law and then we can accuse him of being an apostate? But he flips it around and they all leave, and he tells the woman, and she's guilty, right?
Right.
I mean, he says, "Go and sin no more," but he says, "Where are your accusers?"
Right.
Because if there's no accuser, then there's no punishment.
Right.
Okay, and even though Jesus knows, I mean, but he knows by supernatural means, and that doesn't count. You can't say I had a revelation that my neighbor is an adulterer
Right.
and have that stand up in court. Like there has to be
There
there has to
has
be
to be
actual,
witnesses.
yeah, witnesses and physical evidence. Okay, so the fact that David isn't put to death is similar to why Cain is not put to death. Right? There's a supernatural witness. God says the blood of Abel is crying to me from the dust, but there was no other witnesses. So so God exiles him, but he's not put to death, and that's just it's just kind of a small little clue. But this is the fact that both David and Cain are not killed immediately is just a it's a hint that the law of witnesses is being kept even back then.
Interesting.
Okay. Okay. So intermarriage, right? The law forbids Israelites from intermarrying with Canaanites. Okay, and there's this is a lot bigger topic than we can get into right now. But before that, right? That's in Deuteronomy. Okay, and there's probably other places. But before Deuteronomy, in Genesis, Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Bathsheba, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, which were a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. Like they were sad that he kind of married outside the covenant family. And even though we don't have any commandments about that, but it seems like they were sensitive to those things even before the
Sure.
Torah. So, okay, we talked about incest. I mentioned another interesting one that shows up. So this has to do with Abraham's family again. So Lot, right? Lot is saved from Sodom along with his two daughters,
Right.
and his two daughters, at least, like they think that the whole world has been destroyed, and
Right.
like they're the only ones left, or at least that's the justification they give. Right? They get him drunk and take advantage of their father, become pregnant by him, and the Bible, just the King James, it actually doesn't. It just describes what happened, but doesn't pass any judgment about whether it was good or bad. But the JST actually adds something to that. It says that what Lot's daughters did was wickedness. Again, even though it was before, apparently before, laws about that were given. So,
Interesting.
but of course they were given, and the JST kind of restores that somewhat there. Let's see. Forbidden plural marriages. So there is besides like taking another man's wife, there is another kind of plural marriage that's forbidden, and that is, as is in Leviticus 18, it says, "You shall not take a wife to her sister to vex her, to uncover her nakedness beside the other in her lifetime." So you are not allowed to marry your wife's sister in order to to vex your wife, in order to make her jealous or whatever. Okay.
Right.
So
Because if
now,
that was the case, then Isaac would have been in violation of that, right? If it was just
yeah,
a
Jacob.
Jacob, thank you. Sorry.
Yes.
My bad.
With Rebecca and Leah. Right.
Yeah, he would have been in violation of that, but because it wasn't to vex the other, it was
Correct.
acceptable.
Yeah. Now this is interesting. The Bible doesn't say anything about whether it was vexing or not. But in the Talmud, so this is so the Talmud has good stuff. I'm not speaking against the Talmud, which we talk about it at the beginning. I only take issue with the traditions when they directly contradict. But the Talmud is beautiful and interesting and good. I just have some issues with it. Anyway, that aside, in the Talmud it says, let's see. It must be understood. Let's see. I have it here. Okay. So this is interesting because I'm going to give a little backstory here. Of course, Jacob was a deceiver.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and he kind of reaps what he sowed, because he deceived Isaac to get the blessing, and then he gets deceived by his father-in-law Laban, right?
Right.
With his wives, and also gets deceived by his children with Jacob, right? They take this coat and tell him that Joseph
Right.
is dead. So, okay, so this is from the Gemara, which is Jewish writing. What was the modesty shown by Rachel? It is as it is written. And Jacob, so this is a quotation now from Genesis, and Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother, and that he was Rebekah's son. And maybe asked, was he, Jacob, in fact her father's brother? Wasn't he the son of her father's sister? Rather, it must be understood that when Jacob met Rachel and he said to her, "Will you marry me?" she said to him, "Yes, but my father Laban is a swindler, and you will not be able to outwit him." Jacob alleviated her fears as he said to her that he is her father's brother, meaning not referring not to their familial affiliation, but rather to his ability to deal with her father on his level, as if to say, "I am his brother in deception." Okay.
Oh, okay.
She said to him, "But is it really permitted for the righteous to be involved in deception?" He said to her, "Yes, it is permitted when dealing with deceptive individuals, as the verse states, with the pure you shall show yourself pure, and with the perverse you show yourself subtle."
Interesting.
Quotation from 2 Samuel, indicating that one should deal with others in the manner appropriate for their personality. Jacob then said to her, "What is the deception that he will plan to carry out, and that I should be prepared for?" And Rachel said to him, "I have a sister who is older than I, and he will not marry me off before her, and will try to give you her in my place." So Jacob has a plan. It says Jacob gave her certain distinguishing signs that she should use to indicate to him that she was actually Rachel and not her sister. Okay. And when the wedding night arrived, and Laban planned to switch the sisters, Rachel said to herself, "Now my sister will be embarrassed, for Jacob will ask her for the signs and she will not know them." So she gave them to her. And this is as it was written. It came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. Does this imply by inference that until now she was not Leah? Rather, due to the distinguishing signs that Rachel had given to Leah, he did not know until now, when it was light outside, that she was Leah. Therefore, Rachel merited that Saul should descend from her due to her act of modesty in not revealing to Jacob that she had shown the signs to Leah.
Interesting. So to fulfill the law, she gives this tell, right? And that way they wouldn't be in violation of the vexing thing.
Yes, right. So it was not vexing. In fact, um, Rachel Rachel participated according to this tradition, and I have no reason to disbelieve it. But according to this tradition, Rachel participated in the deception for out of care for her sister.
Yeah.
Just not wanting Leah to be embarrassed and wanting her to be included in the family. So,
well, and yeah, you got to wonder too if there wasn't more love there than just I'm going to save her embarrassment, right?
yeah,
Jacob's a good guy. I think he can do this.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and what a leap of faith on her part that Jacob was going to stick around to
But
do
she
another
knew,
7 years.
the Jewish tradition also says that the plan was, the plan was, and everybody knew it. The plan was for Jacob to marry Rachel and for Leah to marry Esau.
Oh,
But Esau goes and marries some Canaanites instead,
right.
and Esau is not interested in righteousness really, and so Genesis says that she was like soft-eyed, doe-eyed, or whatever it says. The various translations say. The Jewish tradition is that like her eyes were soft because she spent so much time crying, thinking about what it was going to be like to be Esau's wife,
Oh,
and just was like dreading that and dreading her lot. And so this kind of change of events um, happens. And anyway, now a lot of people will point to the very short stories that we have of interactions between Rachel and Leah, and point to that as like how awful plural families are because they fall with each other sometimes. And it's like I just read that and I'm like, there's like 20 verses about their lives. You know, they lived a century or something like that. And we have 20 verses, and you think that like is representative of their life
yeah.
24/7 or something like that. Like
Right.
that was not their life 24/7.
No.
But it does show the conflicts, you know, which don't really mean anything. Um, like even couples that are portrayed as like couples that are portrayed as righteous have problems too. You know,
Right.
Sariah is complaining against Lehi, and you know, Eve is tempting Adam and listening to Satan. You know, even though they're Adam and Eve, they're the greatest, you know, the exemplary couple or whatever. Like they raise the first murderer. You know, so like it's just part of life that there's conflicts and things. So anyway, don't get me off on that tangent. So okay, the so Leviticus 18 says, "Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is abomination." So homosexuality,
Right.
you know, that's not till Leviticus, and yet Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Okay,
Yep. Yeah.
so okay, here's another interesting one. Deuteronomy 25: If brothers reside together and one of them dies childless, the dead man's wife shall not marry an outsider. Her husband's brother must come to her, taking her as his wife in a levirate marriage. The firstborn son of whom she bears will then perpetuate the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be obliterated from Israel. That's Deuteronomy 25, 5 and 6. So that's the law of levirate marriage. That's definitely law of Moses thing.
Right.
And yet before Moses, we have this interesting story about Judah and Tamar.
Right.
Tamar, Judah marries Tamar to his oldest son who dies. After that, his next oldest son Onan is married to her. Right, he dies, and then the next brother Shelah is or Shelah is promised, but Judah kind of withholds him because he's kind of nervous that all his sons keep dying. But anyway, regardless, the point I'm bringing up here is that what Judah is practicing centuries before Sinai is the Levirate law of marriage.
Absolutely.
So
Showing
centuries
again that
before
they have
Deuteronomy.
some sort of knowledge about this, right?
Yeah.
And like, here's the interesting thing. This isn't just 10 Commandments stuff, right? This is going deeper than that even, right?
Yeah.
Things that we shouldn't expect to see if we have the idea that the law of Moses is brand new when Moses brings down the laws.
That's right. Okay, that's right. So we have the death penalty for murder. We kind of mentioned that, but that was like specifically mentioned to Noah.
Right.
Okay. Circumcision was explicitly given to Abraham. We have clean and unclean animals explicitly mentioned. That's Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14, but we have that explicitly mentioned in the story of Noah.
Right.
Right. He takes extra pairs of clean animals, right, because he's going to eat some of them and he's going to sacrifice some of them. So you need extras. Okay. Theft. Theft is mentioned, like they have an understanding of property rights. Okay. This is in the story of again of Jacob and Laban. It says this is Genesis 30. So shall my righteousness answer for me in time to come, when it shall come for my hire before thy face, everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the sheep, that shall be counted stolen with me. So they've got a deal, and they know what property means, and to own private property. So
right.
And there's other examples of all these things. Kidnapping. Okay, kidnapping is specifically forbidden. Deuteronomy 24. If a man is found to have kidnapped, let's see. I'll do one in Exodus. He who kidnaps a man, whether he has sold him or is still holding him, shall be put to death. That's in Exodus 21:16. But Joseph's brothers, they kidnap him and sell him as a slave. Okay, and now there's a death penalty attached to that. Now I should say that a lot of the very harsh penalties in the law of Moses, those should not be understood as automatic, but those are like maximum sentences.
Right.
Very similar to our own legal system, right? We have penalties up to a certain number of years, or up to the death penalty, or whatever. Anyway, so but when Joseph reveals himself in Egypt, he forgives the trespass, but it says that they trespass. It says that they broke a law.
Okay. Oh yeah, it does. You're right. Yeah, yeah. Again, well before Moses.
Yes.
Whew.
Okay. Here's another example. Ritual purity. When when a woman is on her period, or even if a man has some kind of sore that keeps bleeding, or something like that, then there's ritual impurity that is imparted to the person until that's cleared up. So again, centuries before, like Rachel steals Laban's idols, right?
Right.
You remember that, and she Laban comes looking for them, and she hides them.
Right.
Do you remember what she does? She's in her tent, and she like puts them underneath her in like this chest or whatever, and like sits on the chest. And when Laban comes in to search the tents, she tells him that she's on her period and can't move. And
Uh,
he's like, "Oh, okay, I won't touch you." And why is that like a defense? It's because they are sensitive
the,
to
the purity law.
these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that are these purity laws. Okay.
Interesting.
Let's see. Leviticus 19, you shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. Um, in meat yard, in weight, or in measure. Just balances, just weights, and a just ephah, a just hin shall ye have. I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. So just weights and measures, right? This is something every society needs to have. We have government agencies whose job is to make sure that
Right.
those things are regulated. So in Job chapter 31 says, if I have walked with vanity, or my foot hath hastened to deceit, let me be weighed in a just balance, or in an even balance, that God may know mine integrity. So he's talking about just weights and measures. Okay, coveting, right? This is the 10th commandment, thou shalt
Right.
not covet. But we have examples of this before. Coveting, even coveting, which is like a sin of your mind. It's not even something that you do with your hands or your body necessarily, right? Just a sin
Right.
of your mind. But Cain's the first one. He covets Abel's flocks. He's jealous.
Right.
Satan says, if you enter in this agreement with me, you can have that stuff, right? But it starts with coveting. Okay, and Job also says, if my step has turned out of the way, and my heart walked after my eyes, and if any blot has cleaved to my hands, then let me sow and another eat, let my offspring be rooted out. If my heart has been deceived by a woman, if I have laid wait at my neighbor's door, like looking for my neighbor's wife, then,
Interesting.
okay, so and he says this is a heinous crime, iniquity to be punished by the judges. Okay, widows and orphans. Okay, Exodus says, do not oppress the stranger, do not oppress widows and the fatherless, right? Take care of them. Deuteronomy says the same thing. Again, Job says, if I have withheld the poor from their desire, or have caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or have eaten my morsel myself alone, and the fatherless have not eaten thereof, then let me be punished, he says. So here he is concerned about the widows and the fatherless, just like the Torah says. We have, okay, we've probably gone on long enough, but I'll just mention some other ones. There's no respect of persons in judgment. There's things about rape, about the feast of Shavuot or Pentecost. There's stuff about priesthood, and stuff about tithing, idols, idol worshiping, blaspheming God's name or taking God's name in vain, eating blood, covering the blood with dust, temples, dividing the land by lot. I read some of these already on the other list. So punishment for prostitution is in the Torah, and also mentioned in the story of Judah and Tamar. Loving your neighbor, and anyway, lots of other things. I don't want to take a lot more time, but we've already gone for a couple hours, I guess. But anyway, there's so many even details. I'm going to mention one more. So I just gave a Sunday lesson about this, about meat and milk. So this is a big part of Jewish identity,
Right.
and a lot of people think that it's part of the Torah, because the Torah repeats 3 times this phrase, "Thou shalt not boil a kid," or the King James says, "Thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk."
Right.
And there's a whole string of interpretations, Talmudic interpretations that have come from that. But there's an interesting event that happens in Abraham's life, where the 3 men, the 3 angels, come and visit him, and immediately Abram says, "Stay, let me wash your feet, have a meal." He tells Sarai to make some unleavened cakes of bread. He goes and gets a calf, gives it to one of his young men, says, "Hurry up and fix this calf." And Abram goes and gets milk and butter and like gives him this meal: bread, milk and butter, and meat all together.
Okay.
And so the question is, um, well, a lot of times, so like like the standard maybe Christian or even Mormon interpretation is, well, yeah, Abram did that, and the angels did that too, because the angels don't keep the law, because the law of Moses, because it's all done away and just like temporary, and or maybe the law wasn't given yet or something like that. But my interpretation is not that Abram didn't keep the law, because the Lord says that he kept it. My interpretation is that he kept the law, but this prohibition on eating cheeseburger is actually not the commandment, is not part of the law. And so therefore the angels and Abraham didn't see a need to keep it. So what do we do with now I know that there's interesting interpretations, like symbolic interpretations of this, about cruelty, and being kind to animals, and not mixing life and death and things like that. And I think those are like useful things to keep in mind. But I don't think that the commandment is thou shalt not have cheeseburgers.
Thank goodness.
So rest at ease, Dave. If it was good enough for Abraham and the angels,
Good
then
enough for me.
it's good enough for you. Yeah.
Good enough for me.
So I'll just say very briefly, there's a lot more that could be said here, but that word boil is a bashal, if I remember right, but it is used idiomatically to mean, it does mean to like finish, it means to finish cooking by boiling, but it also means to like ripen or to like grow to completion.
Oh,
And that word is used sometimes to talk about like ripe grain or ripe grapes. Like literally the scripture, like if you're reading it in Hebrew, it would say the grapes are finished boiling.
okay.
Which obviously the grapes have not been boiling on the vine. What it means is that they're done, they're ripe. So this phrase, "do not boil a kid," means do not ripen the kid or like grow it to adulthood in its mother's milk, because the commandment is it's talking about firstlings. The commandment is that if you have a firstling, that you're supposed to offer it on the eighth day. And so this phrase, it's actually connected, if in the scriptures, in the Torah, it's connected to the first fruits offerings. And it says, in some places, it says, do not delay, do not be slothful in keeping the commandment. Do not delay to bring the offering that God has required. And then idiomatically, do not boil the kid in its mother's milk. In other words, don't let that animal that you're supposed to offer on the eighth day grow to adulthood, because who knows what might happen. The animal that you were going to offer might get sick or might get injured, or it might grow up, and then you kind of start second guessing whether you want to offer it, because that's a pretty good looking sheep. Maybe I want to eat that. Or, oh, look at that, it's got wool on it now because I left it so long. I better I might as well shear it and get some wool from this animal that I was supposed to offer to the Lord, or whatever you could think of. And this has application beyond that. Like it's just talking about sloth in general. Like when God commands something, do it. Like that's what the idiom is saying, in my opinion, and not saying that you need to avoid cheeseburgers. Therefore, this story about Abraham and the angels, I believe, is actually in keeping with the Torah rather than
Then an exception to the rule.
Rather than an exception. Yeah, saying Abram didn't keep it, or they hadn't received the law, or the law is not eternal, or some other explanation. There are other like really crazy explanations too. Like some of the rabbis will say, well, Abram gave him this meal, but he stood there and made sure that they kept the rules. And they had the milk, and then he made them wait for an hour before he let them eat the meat. There are even some explanations where they say Abram like magically conjured up a fake calf that wasn't really meat, but it was like a magical creation of Abraham. so that it didn't fall under this prohibition. Anyway, there's some imaginative explanations, entertaining, but I just think it's an idiom about not delaying to give what the Lord requires. So, okay,
Okay.
we could go more, but that's probably about all I got. So,
Okay. No, that's good. I want to wrap up with this then. I want to ask you this question. Um, we talked about all this, right? And this is fascinating stuff, right? I love talking about the Old Testament. I love making these connections. But what should be the takeaway here, right? What is it we should take away from knowing that the law of Moses, as we refer to it, actually came well before Moses?
well, the takeaway for me, the part that I love about that idea is that my God truly, His ways and His words are eternal, and are like in that revelation to John Taylor. Like, I command something, and it is eternal. Is it done away? Now, apostasy occurs, and I know that the Melchizedek priesthood, and the portions of the plan were kept back from have been kept back from people from time to time, and I don't deny that. But it's not because God changed His mind. Like,
Right.
it's not because we worship Zeus or Jupiter or Marduk or something, where they change their minds and come up with different plans, or they're just doing things on the fly, and they're like, well, from dispensation to dispensation, we're gonna switch things up. Um, I I don't believe that. So for me, it's a matter of faith, um, and I find it very faith promoting and comforting to know that uh, God just means what He says. He says these things are forever. And now, I will say also, as a takeaway, that um, uh, like Joseph Smith, we started off with that quotation from, well, there's a paraphrase from Joseph Smith about animal sacrifice being restored, and also about everything that was before Moses being restored, but not all of the law of Moses, which I think is a lot of traditions. But Joseph Smith didn't really start animal sacrifice, at least not in mass.
Right.
There's whispers about a few things being done here and there, um, but animal sacrifice has not been a mainstream part of the restoration. And Joseph Smith said that, well, the reason is we don't have a proper place. Um, and we're kind of in the same position as the Jews at this point. They also totally believe in animal sacrifice, but they don't do it. And why not? Well, it's because they don't have a temple. But they're planning on building one. And Joseph Smith said the same. He says when the temple's built, and he was talking, I believe, about the temple complex in Independence. When that temple complex is built, then animal sacrifices will resume, like as part of this dispensation. So, I just want to make that clear that even though there are some laws that we cannot keep, that doesn't mean that God has changed His mind, but we just find ourselves in kind of an exiled situation. We're like the Jews who are exiled in Babylon. Like we are living in Babylon, and
Right.
so we do the best we can. But God has not changed. Our circumstances may have changed, but that doesn't mean that the commandments have changed. And I love that. I love believing in a God who doesn't change and whose plans don't change, and who is the same from everlasting to everlasting. So that's the takeaway for me.
I would agree. You know, I expect God to deal justly with all His children, right? And as I alluded to before, if He favors one generation over another, where does that leave us?
Yeah, that's no
That,
good.
that's no good.
That's a faithless God. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I'll I'll use an example here that I work with every day. latitudes and departures, right? And so we'll take an angle and a distance, right? And let's say you mean to kind of turn a 90-degree angle, right? But let's say you turn 89 degrees, 59 minutes, 59 seconds instead of 90 degrees.
Yeah.
You're not going to see a difference in a foot, right? You're not going to see a difference in 100 feet.
Yeah.
You may not even see much difference in 1,000 feet, but you get out a mile, well, now you're starting to creep up there, right? And
Right.
so if God changes, then that leaves us in a place where we can't really reach our destination, right? We're going to miss where it is we're trying to go. And so the fact that God is fixed, immovable, the North Star, you can look and you can always find your bearings again, right? You can always get back on the path. But if that target's moving, good luck, right? Because you will never be able to come up with a fixed location.
Right.
And and one of the things I love about the restored gospel is that many of its doctrine gives us proximity to deity. It tells
Yeah.
us, here is deity, here is us. I can fix my sight here and get to where it is God wants me to go. And without that knowledge, without that surety, we're flapping in the wind, right? Maybe we get close, maybe we don't. But unless it's fixed, we don't stand much of a chance of getting exactly where we want to go. And we know
Yeah.
as Mormons from temple theology and the temple liturgy that he expects exactness and honor in these things.
Yeah.
And if that's what he requires, you can bet that's what he abides. It's eternal law.
It's an
Here.
undeviating course. Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely. So, dude, good stuff as always, man.
Yeah. We'll have to do this again soon. I have some other things I'd like to talk
Yeah.
to you about. So
Yeah, absolutely. And you get back up here to down back over here to Missouri, we're gonna have to smoke brisket. I'm just saying that's par for the course. I
well,
have yet to throw a major party, so we're gonna have to do that soon. I think. I think spring. It's gonna be a deal. So
okay. You gonna have dairy with that?
I mean, yeah, I mean, there's gonna be cheese on a salad somewhere.
Yeah, there'll be cheese or
I
something.
mean,
Okay.
if you want to go the way of Cain and offer up, fruits and vegetables, that's your choice. But
Oh
I
no.
prefer to stick to the law and just with the meat.
Yeah.
But that's
That's
just me.
good.
So
That's good.
awesome. All right, dude. Well, I appreciate it.
Hey. Yeah.
All right.
And we'll
Stick
see you
around.
again later.
Yep, absolutely. Stick around just a few minutes. All right. Bye, everybody.